Right, found it, thank you. Okay, so this is the transition clinic, how it looks like at the hospital. You see, it's very similar chairs. It's really a coffee table and comfortable chairs. And that's important too, that the setting is extremely important when you want to engage with teenagers and the families. You want to create an environment that young people feel comfortable talking. And for example, as a physiatrist, I also see the children for medical treatments, including botulinum toxin treatment. So I have to make clear there are no needles in this room. We would just talk, and that's the purpose of the visit. So now I know a little bit who is attending. We have 286 voters, mostly healthcare providers in the field of for children only, some researchers. We have some healthcare providers for children and adults, family members. Great to hear that there are family members in the room, educators, only very few, 0.7% healthcare providers for adults only, and other. So getting to know the child, a teenager in clinic is through talking, but for younger children, it's another way of communicating and connecting is sometimes talking about what they're wearing. And here you see a few examples. And I sort of started almost a campaign of t-shirts, and the parents are even, I think, sometimes shopping to impress me with what's out there. But it's important because it gives an important message, like the left one of a kind. What does that tell us about the child and the parents? Some are quite sometimes very out there and voted most handsome, and I have a few more. Look at this one. I've got a PhD in awesome. Some are more reflected. It's tough to be a genius, but I manage. So there's a good reflection here. This is the life course framework I just talked about, and the importance of considering the lives of the children in the context of a full life from preconception until aging and older adults. And it's just a moment in time that people transition, or basically make a transfer from pediatric to adult services. Having said that, we know that the outcomes are not good, and that's the tide I want to talk about. If we talk about not good, then we have in the literature some frameworks that can guide us. We need to look at outcomes in terms of population health, which includes health in a broader sense, including, in my view, participation, but also the healthcare experience and the cost that would also include the burden to the person and the family. This is a sort of a summary, a synthesis of the literature as far as I know, and I'm sure there's more detail to it. But I want to highlight that the children grow up and become adults, and basically we lose them out of sight. But what we do know about their participation in health outcomes is not good. We know at the physical health level there are indicators of low physical activity levels, increased pain and fatigue. There are mental health issues, anxiety and depression. And in terms of participation, youth with disabilities live less or live more with their parents, less apart from their parents' home, have lower rates of employment. I was very excited to hear the introduction by the European Parliament to make it a real right for young people to have full access to employment, and fewer relationships. It must be clear that there's still a paucity of data, and in particular longitudinal data, although I must say some evidence from long-term follow-up studies is emerging, and there are some excellent presentations during the program sharing those results. Another issue is that the results often are reported in standard terms in terms of where do you live, are you employed, are you being married, and so forth, which brings people with a disability sometimes in a disadvantaged position. There is no research really addressing individualized and person-centered outcomes. So if you want to make a career in research, I strongly recommend you to focus on this. And then there is a complication when we talk about participation. It's not only an objective level of participation levels, but it is also the experience between the person and environment in different contexts, and the difficulties people experience with that participation, and sometimes the need for assistance. I already said how important it is to recognize the person. And we do know from the literature that identity as a person with a disability can be difficult. And it's not only the process of self-discovery, but it's also what do you share and when do you share? For example, when you apply for a job, do you share that you have cerebral palsy or not? That are the struggles that people sometimes are dealing with. People also report that they sometimes struggle with interactions with healthcare professionals, lacking the interaction and the positive experiences. Maybe the introduction can help. And not only that on one hand they are looking for information and expecting the healthcare provider and other people in their lives to help them and provide that information and help navigate the system, but also to be valued for their own personal experience, the lived experience. At the societal level, we see also important numbers, including increased emergency department visits and hospitalizations after the transition to adulthood. It's not only the healthcare costs, but it's in particular, I want to highlight the burden for the young person and the family to take care when you are not well. Last year in Canada, we had a town hall meeting. It was called Crisis of Care with the CBC radio, where over 250 people, families came together, sharing their experiences, and it was not good. So we need to turn the tide. What are we actually doing in the field? I think there is a lot happening, which is all positive. If you look at the literature, we see a huge growth in models and programmatic interventions to improve transitions. But there is also a difficulty and a challenge evaluating the programs, what works best, where and how. One of the challenges that are surrounding those programs is that it's often condition or center specific, so it doesn't easily translate to other places. We also have a need for good evaluation and evidence-based evaluations. That is hindered by the use of homegrown measurement tools, and we need valid and reliable tools. And often the whole transition issue is focused on the transfer from pediatrics to adult healthcare and not on the transition process as a whole. A few years ago, we did a knowledge synthesis for the Ministry for Children and Youth Services in Ontario, and we came up with a conceptual developmental framework that I think, in my mind, can be helpful because it highlights the processes and also the potential for influences. So if you look at the right side at the outcomes and take participation as an outcome, and looking backwards from right to left, what can we actually do in our assessment and in our interventions to promote participation? Well, we need to consider not only the person and the characteristics of the person. Yes, a GMFCS level is very important, and it does make a difference if you have GMFCS level 1 or 5. But does it matter in the long term? For example, I have a PhD student. He has cerebral palsy and GMFCS level 4, and he's going to defend his PhD thesis in a few months' time. So it's not hindering him to participate in the PhD program and to excel academically. By the way, he's also married and living a good life. What made that happen? Because the literature is almost against all odds. Well, if we zoom in on the funnel, and that is widening, at the core, there are the relationships. So people with positive and good relationships and a network are more likely to have good participation outcomes. The people who are provided with opportunities have better outcomes. And also, if that comes with positive experiences, they have better outcomes. So then the question is, how can we influence that process? So I want to go back to the conversation. How are we doing time-wise? Not too bad?
Too bad.
All right.
5 minutes.
Sure. So I want to be now not the parent or the other stakeholder. I want to go into the role of the teenager. So what is it What is it to be a teenager at a teen transition clinic, sitting in the chair, coming with your parents? And what has been the experience? I really want to, we can all relate to it, because once we were all teenager, and we may have had experiences ourselves. For example, as a 15-year-old, I got very sick. I got a high fever, didn't know what was going on with my body. It happened that I developed an infection, and it sort of, the bacteria traveled in my bloodstream and developed a lymphadenitis. I had to be admitted to a hospital and so forth. And what I never forget is the family doctor who took the time to sit down before I had to be transported to hospital. Sit down, it was not a long conversation, to sit down and truly explain what was going on in a very meaningful and understandable way. And here I am, age 53, almost 54, still carrying that experience with me, which leads me to the next slide, and just want you to reflect on your own experiences and what relates you to those teenagers, because that's important, right? We can make a difference. So there is a poll. Oh, there you go. Thank you so much for participating. I'll continue the presentation to talk about that conversation with teenagers and the relationships, providing them with opportunities to talk about what's important to them. And of course, I cannot give a presentation without showing the ICF framework. It's very helpful because there are a lot of elements that we need to take into account. But when talking to an adolescent and teenager, it's very important to start at the activity and participation level. What's going on in their lives at school, at home, and in the community. I have found a tool that has been very helpful. It was developed by colleagues in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam. Some of them are here actually at the conference. It's called the Rotterdam Transition Profile. It was developed for a research study, and it includes participation levels, and it also can grade health services. But I want to focus on the different participation outcomes: education and employment, finances, housing, relationships, from friendships to more close relationships and intimate relationships, including sexual health and sexual orientation, transportation, leisure, and social activities. We recently did a review how the transition profile has been used in the literature and found that it most oftenly is used in the research, but I have good experiences applying it and having it as a springboard for the conversation in clinic. It's very neutral, the youth understand it, and it also has a nice sort of build-up with some more general, neutral topics in the beginning, education and finances, and it ends with social activities, but in the middle, a more hotter topic, if you want to say it that way, talking about yourself, about your experiences with dating, possibly sexual orientation, and so forth, and sexual health. It's very important that people, through that conversation, become aware of the ability to self-manage, and that are the tasks that we all have to take to live well and with or without a chronic condition. And that means gaining confidence in medical management, role management, and emotional management. And we know that teenagers have to learn those skills, and there's a shared management model. Some of it is managed by the parents when the children are younger, for example, at age 12, and then you see an increase in the level or the extent of youth managed at age 18. You also see there is a little bit of difference in the perspectives of different stakeholders. Healthcare providers, I have to warn you, overrate the ability that youth can self-manage, where youth have a somewhat lower rate, and probably parents have the most realistic sort of response, as they know what's going on behind the scenes, and they are the safety net. So in the last 5 minutes, I want to speak to what we have done in terms of our innovation for participation. We worked with a couple of tools, and I want to share you some of our learning. As you can see, it's really become a program of research. We started off with the youth kit that was developed with people with disabilities. And as you can see, it is an organizational tool focusing on promotion of self-management in various domains. I'll give you the example of the healthcare domain, where youth can fill in on paper or on the computer in a fillable PDF what the health condition name is and how it is caused and when it was diagnosed. This gives very useful conversations with teenagers and also the parents to hear it again when the child is somewhat older. We did a study, it was called the TRACE study, and we evaluated the use of the youth kit both in a quantitative and qualitative way. The most important learning was that the impact was only modest at best, and it was really the youth, the healthcare provider, and the parent working together. What we also found was that we actually missed an appropriate tool to assess a child's readiness in those skills and transition, and that became a barrier. So then we developed a measure. It is called the transition queue. It's a very short questionnaire of 14 items, 1 to 14, ranked in order. 1 is the most easiest answer, or a question to answer, and 14 the most difficult, and it has 3 answering options: never, sometimes, and always. This measure was developed through the process of patient-reported outcomes, so with cognitive interviews, right from the beginning with the people involved in this, so including youth and parents. That helped us to generate the items, so what should we measure, and then we had to reduce the items, of course, and then we followed up with the validation sample in Ontario. Here you see the scores of the transition queue on a scale of 0 to 100 for the different age groups, both in the original and the validation sample. And as expected and hypothesized, the youth do increase those skills. Again, not to the maximum on average. I must say that the lines are a little bit not right, because it was a cross-sectional study. So we didn't miss actually the individual patterns. If you are interested in the transition queue, it is now integrated in an app and you can download it. There's a QR code on the screen, and I will also present it on a poster later this afternoon. It's very easy for the youth to use, and you get a score, but more importantly of the score, that doesn't mean anything to the youth, are the items, so always, sometimes, and never. And we can set goals around those specific items. We did recently finished a pilot randomized controlled trial in a group of youth, age 14 to 18, and there was a range of chronic health conditions, including developmental disabilities. I won't read the qualitative stuff because they were very supportive, but if you look at the longitudinal trajectories, you can see that the youth did increase their scores, but there are very individual trajectories, both, and development is not linear. So I'll go to my last slides. I think I hope that transition is a complex issue, and if we want to promote participation for youth with disabilities, we need to support them. The knowledge that we have generated through our research, I hope, will help to inform you, but information is not knowledge in itself. We need to combine it with tacit knowledge through experience and education, and I hope this presentation has helped you a little bit with going to the transition clinic, how you can go about a conversation. That conversation is essential, I think, to the process. First, build positive relationships and a trustful setting. Create timely opportunities, and make sure there are good experiences. Focus on the strengths of the youth and focus on their future. I think we have made big strides for teens transitioning to adulthood, and as long as we keep shifting our focus towards the adolescent's capacity to self-manage, there are things we can do to educate and empower them, and then promote participation. From my learning, setting goals and fostering those skills and knowledge are an essential part of this shift. I want to end this presentation with thanking all my colleagues at Kenchild and participating in the different research studies. Kenchild was founded 30 years ago, and I'm happy that Peter Rosenbaum is in the room as co-founder of Kenchild. He is my mentor and my friend, and certainly helped build my future. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. It was very nice to give us the framework in which the transition has to be think of.
Right.
Okay, so we have maybe not 10 minutes, but we should have, however, time for, I've been told by the master 5 minutes, let's say 6. Let's say, it's time for questions. So really, we have already one question from someone from Belgium, I believe. Yeah, can you, someone is on charge for microphone? No? Should I? No, maybe not. Unless you, yeah, that has to be. Well, I think, sir, you are giving the microphone yourself? Yeah, I'm taking your time. You must be very fast. It's over there, yeah. You can say your name for people, yeah, and where you are from.
Hello, I'm Bernardin from the 5th row there.
Please.
Thank you, Jan Willem. This is really good. I have 2 questions for you to choose. So you can choose one of the 2 or another one. You showed us 3 seats there. And you presented, when you said, who are you? You said, I'm a physiatrist. Is it okay with 3 seats, and who should be sitting at your place when you're not there? That's one possibility. The other one is, well, transitions. You mentioned from childhood to adulthood, however culture defines these transitions. Do you have other transitions, and also the world is transitioning? So you can choose simple, less simple.
Yeah.
Short
Okay.
reply.
Mm-hmm. Let me start with the chairs. Take the simple one. The other one is a huge question. So a couple of things, and that's also the learning over time. When I started at McMaster Children's Hospital, I was basically handed a list of teenagers that were used to be seen by the developmental pediatricians, but not seen anymore. And I started the clinic with an occupational therapist, a social worker, and myself. And we were a core team to develop some of the tools and the setting and so forth. It was a very good experience, but the pitfall was that there was no connection with the healthcare providers that are involved on the team with the youth and the family. So it became a lot of a standalone clinic. So we changed the model, and now everyone who is involved in the care of the team, of the teen and the family, is invited to the appointment. That's number one. And I forgot to say, but everyone will also make their own introductions, including the teens and the families. So we're all truly working as a team together. And then the beginning is with the full team, just to see what's on the agenda, what are the most important things. And then we'll introduce the concept that the teen has an opportunity to meet with the doctor on their own, because that's a very important element of the training. And then at the end of the session, the parents will be brought back in the room because they need to know what the plan is moving forward. So that's the model.
Okay, thank you very much. More questions? Questions? I don't see hands.
Marais?
Yeah. Please, a short question and short reply to give some space for other people.
Thank you very much for the clear overview, and you put focus also on building relationships. We all know that developing to adulthood takes more time, also will go on in their 20s, and work to build relationships with caregivers and the professionals in the adult clinic.
That's a short question. Very important question. Thank you, Marais. It's important to create your own network. Often the existing programs, and I had the same experience, are not there. So again, through personal connections, for example, with adult rehabilitation doctors, we were able to make the connection, and the model also is that the youth will be seen and introduced or referred to the adult healthcare provider before they actually transfer, which will allow them to build that relationship, and hopefully it is a good experience, and if not, they can always come back to me. So we have a little bit of an sort of transition period in that regard. Some more time? No?
The other questions? Short, maybe one last question you wanted to ask?
I don't know whether it's a question, but maybe a testimony. And I understand from my personal experience that I don't know whether it was a measure of a success in transition or whether it was a goal. But what my son loved very much was when he was able to put 500 kilometers between him and his family. So I don't know whether this is an important goal for all the teenagers that you take into this transition.
Absolutely. Well, any goal, right? As long as it's their goal, that's the whole point. We need to explore together what is meaningful, what is a purposeful goal in terms of participation. So thank you for bringing that forward. Okay,
if I can just make a last comment, which I don't know. I like your initial overlap within the circle. I think one part, of course, is my approach as a medical person and psychiatrist as well. I think the problem of mind,
yes,
that is something that I believe is more and more and too much overlook, the problem of mood disorder on these children.
I agree.
Overlook.
Yeah.
That the way in which it has to be treated is that story.
Right.
But do you agree on that?
I certainly agree on it. We start to do a lot of imaging and understanding of the developing brain, meaning the very young brain, but there's so much development of the brain in the adolescent years and even beyond. So we have now started, as part of our CPNet program in Ontario, to do a proof of principle study to look at brain structure and function, in particular around executive functioning in adolescents and young adults with cerebral palsy. And we found that the neural networks are there, but there is an issue with information processing speed is slightly affected, and our hypothesis is that it could be related to anxiety and depression, because people feel less comfortable developing those skills, and the pressures are really high.
Very interesting for research, but also the clinical part.
Yes.
Looking after, being able to make diagnosis,
yes,
and treatment. Okay, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Jan Willem.